If someone had told me 6 months ago that my biggest adversary in life would be a middle-aged woman in capri pants wielding an HOA handbook like it was the Constitution, I would have laughed. Yet here I was, locked in a battle of wits and wills, with the self-appointed dictator of Oakridge Estates, Marlene Fitzsimmons. It all started with my pool, a simple, honest-to-God, backyard swimming pool. After years of saving, I finally had enough to renovate the old, crumbling eyesore into a perfect suburban oasis. Nothing extravagant, just a sleek design, modern tiling, and a waterfall feature because, well, why not? I'd lived in this neighborhood for almost a decade without so much as a single parking ticket, so I didn't think twice about submitting my plans to the HOA for approval. Enter Marlene. With her tightly permed blonde bob, surgically arched eyebrows, and a penchant for making simple conversations feel like Supreme Court depositions, she had somehow clawed her way to the top of the HOA board. No one knew exactly how she got there. Whispers of backdoor dealings and strategically placed fines had surfaced over the years. But once she took power, she ruled Oakridge Estates with an iron fist and a clipboard. The first sign of trouble came in the form of a letter. Not an email, not a phone call, but a full-fledged snail-mailed envelope with my name printed in bold red ink. Dear Mr. Carter, it has come to our attention that your recent pool renovation does not comply with Oakridge Estates' architectural aesthetic. Effective immediately, construction must cease until a formal hearing is scheduled. Sincerely, Marlene Fitzsimmons, Oakridge Estates Homeowners Association President. I read it twice, then 3 times, trying to decipher what the hell architectural aesthetic even meant. I hadn't built a medieval moat. I hadn't installed a neon water slide shaped like a dragon. It was a pool, a regular blue-tiled, chlorine-filled pool. So, being the reasonable man that I am, I decided to pay Marlene a visit. Her house sat at the center of the cul-de-sac like a throne room, complete with a manicured lawn that looked like it had been measured blade by blade. I knocked, bracing myself for what I assumed would be a normal adult conversation. Instead, Marlene answered the door with a saccharine smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Oh, Mr. Carter," she cooed, as if I were a misbehaving schoolboy. "I was just about to call you. I assume you got my letter." "I did," I said, holding it up. "And I was hoping you could clarify. The pool is disruptive," she interrupted. "It doesn't align with the visual harmony of our community." "Visual harmony?" I repeated, baffled. "Marlene, 3 doors down, there's a guy with a flamingo-themed front yard. How does that fit in?" She pursed her lips. That was approved. And my pool wasn't? "It was pending approval," she corrected. "But after further review, we've determined it's an eyesore." I looked over her shoulder, catching a glimpse of her pristine, Olympic-sized pool glittering in her backyard. The hypocrisy was so blatant I almost laughed. "I'm appealing this," I said. "Oh, honey," she chuckled, condescending as ever. "You're welcome to try." And with that, she shut the door in my face. I figured that would be the end of it. I'd attend the next HOA meeting, present my case, and worst-case scenario, I'd have to tweak a few things. But I underestimated Marlene. The escalation was swift and relentless. First, there were the fines. $200 for excessive noise from construction, which had already ended. $350 for failure to maintain the approved lawn aesthetic, because a single dandelion had dared sprout up overnight. Then came the passive-aggressive notes on my door. "We maintain order in this community. Please be mindful of your choices. Some of us value tradition." Then the anonymous complaints. My mailbox was allegedly too modern. My recycling bins were not aligned with the street's flow. My house number font was out of compliance. It was absurd. But Marlene knew exactly what she was doing. She wanted me to give up. So naturally, I did the opposite. I paid the fines with pennies. I documented every infraction and sent back a longer, even more passive-aggressive note, CCing every HOA board member. I mowed my lawn 3 times a day just to spite her. Then, The pool was finished. And just when I thought I'd finally won, I woke up to hell in my backyard. I stepped outside that morning, coffee in hand, ready to bask in my victory. But instead of the pristine, crystal-clear water I had expected, I found sand. Not a little, not a prank-level amount. My pool was completely filled with sand. For a long moment, I just stared. The kind of stunned, brain-malfunctioning stare one has when their brain refuses to process the sheer audacity of what they're witnessing. Then I checked my security cameras, and there she was. Marlene Fitzsimmons, in the dead of night, dumping industrial-grade sand into my brand-new pool. It was all there, the sneaky glances over her shoulder, the gloves, the absolute glee on her face as she carried out her deranged mission. She had even brought help, a couple of HOA lackeys lugging sacks of sand like co-conspirators in some suburban heist. I should have been furious, and I was. But more than anything, I smiled, because Marlene had just made her first real mistake. Marlene had just made her first real mistake. She thought she was untouchable. She was about to learn otherwise. I rewatched the footage, pausing at a particularly damning frame. Marlene, standing triumphantly over the mountain of sand in my ruined pool, hands on her hips like she'd just conquered enemy territory. The sheer gall of this woman. I should have been livid. I should have been throwing furniture. But instead I felt something better, satisfaction. Because now, I had her. Still, I knew I had to play this carefully. Marlene wasn't just a control freak. She was a manipulator. She'd spent years bending HOA rules in her favor, steamrolling over anyone who dared oppose her. If I came at her too soon, she'd weasel out of it like she always did, so I waited. Instead of storming over to her house, I took my time. I went about my morning as usual, mowed my perfectly compliant lawn, waved at my neighbors, even smiled at the HOA spies Marlene had undoubtedly planted around the neighborhood. Then I called the cops. Within an hour, a squad car rolled up. Officer Daniels, a guy I'd seen around town, stepped out, squinting at my backyard. "You gotta be kidding me." Wish I was. I gestured to the cameras, but lucky for me, I caught the whole thing. Daniels whistled, shaking his head as he reviewed the footage. "Wow, this lady's got some nerve." "Oh, you have no idea." But just as I was relishing the thought of Marlene getting dragged away in cuffs, Daniel's expression soured. "Here's the thing, though. This is HOA property." I frowned. "Excuse me? Your pool? It's considered part of the community property guidelines since it affects neighborhood valuation. That means the HOA has some authority over it. Now, what she did was definitely illegal, but... Daniels sighed. "You're looking at a civil case, not a criminal one. Unless you can prove intent to cause financial harm or trespassing, with malicious destruction of property, it won't stick." I clenched my jaw. "She trespassed. I have her on camera." Daniels grimaced. "Yeah. But HOA bylaws are tricky. They might argue she was enforcing community standards." Of course, this wasn't just about her. This was about the system she'd built. Layers upon layers of bureaucratic nonsense that let her do whatever the hell she wanted while everyone else had to jump through hoops. But Marlene had underestimated me. I wasn't playing checkers. I was playing chess. Instead of confronting her outright, I let her sweat. I smiled at her during HOA meetings. I didn't retaliate. I paid my next ridiculous fine in advance, just to see her eye twitch. And every time I caught her watching me from across the street, I waved like we were old friends. It drove her insane. Then, the rumors started. I made sure of it. I casually mentioned my insurance claim at the grocery store. I let it slip at the gym that the police were really interested in the footage. Within a week, the entire neighborhood was buzzing. People started asking questions. Then one morning, I woke up to another letter from the HOA, this one hand-delivered. Shoved under my door before sunrise. "Cease all defamatory remarks about the HOA board and its members. Any further accusations or insinuations will result in legal action." I laughed. She was scared, but not scared enough to back down. Because that same evening, I got a call from my bank. "Mr. Carter, we've received a request for an audit of your property taxes and an investigation into zoning compliance." My stomach dropped. I knew exactly who was behind this. Marlene wasn't just playing defense. She was doubling down. She'd weaponized the system against me, turning my own mortgage and property value into a battlefield. If the city found even a minor violation, I could be facing thousands in fees and legal costs. She wanted to bleed me dry. And for a second, I almost panicked. Almost. Then I remembered something. Marlene wasn't invincible. She was hiding something. Two, I started digging. I wasn't the only person Marlene had crossed. Over the years, she had left a trail. Angry homeowners, quietly forced sales, absurd zoning changes that just so happened to benefit certain developers. And then I found it, a buried land deal. Marlene had been working with a local developer, one who'd benefited enormously from her rule changes. Every fine, every ridiculous violation she enforced. They were part of a scheme to keep property values unstable, to force certain people out, and guess who was planning to sell a chunk of HOA-controlled land at a steep discount in exchange for a hefty payout? Marlene. The HOA was her personal cash cow, and now I had the proof. I sat on it for another few days, just long enough for Marlene to think she was winning, long enough for her to push one step too far. It happened. At the next HOA meeting, the community center was packed. People had caught wind of the pool debacle, the police visit, the rumors about the fines. Tension hung in the air as Marlene sat at the head of the table, her usual smug confidence intact. "Before we begin," she announced, "I'd like to address the recent false accusations being spread." I leaned back in my seat, arms crossed. "Here it comes. The HOA operates with full transparency," she continued, voice dripping with self-righteousness. "And any suggestion otherwise is not only reckless, but legally actionable." There it was, the legal threat. She thought I'd fold. Instead, I pulled out my own folder. "Glad you mentioned transparency, Marlene." I stood, flipping open the documents. "Because I have some questions," Marlene's smile faltered. "This is a property transfer agreement," I said, holding up the evidence. "Between you and Sunridge Development Group. Seems you've been working real hard to adjust property values. Want to explain why this sale was never disclosed to the HOA members?" The room fell silent. Marlene's face drained of color, and for the first time since this whole thing started, since she declared war on my pool, my property, my sanity, she looked afraid. I took a step closer, lowering my voice just enough to let the tension simmer. "You made a mistake, Marlene." I smiled. "You tried to screw over the wrong guy." For the first time, she had nothing to say. But it wasn't over. Not yet. Because just when I thought I had her cornered, just when I thought I'd landed the final blow, she smiled. And that's when I knew. She had a backup plan. Marlene didn't do losing. She didn't just roll over and accept defeat like a normal person. No, this woman played the long game, and if she was still smirking, even with an entire room of angry homeowners staring her down, then she still thought she could win. "Mr. Carter," she purred, steepling her fingers like a cartoon supervillain. "I appreciate your enthusiasm, but I believe you're misunderstanding a few things." I leaned forward. "Enlighten me." She turned to the crowd, her smile confident, her voice smooth. "It's true that the HOA was in discussions with developers, but these discussions were meant to increase property values for the benefit of everyone." A murmur went through the room. I could see it happening. She was spinning it, making it sound like she had been acting in their best interests all along. And as for the claim that I hid these discussions, she made air quotes like this was all some wacky misunderstanding. I was simply waiting until the proposal was finalized before bringing it to a vote. I almost admired the audacity. Almost. But I had one last move left to play. I pulled out my phone and tapped the screen. That's interesting, Marlene, because I actually called Sunridge Development Group this morning. She blinked. Didn't. See that coming, did you? They were very helpful, I continued, especially when I mentioned your name. Turns out, you weren't just discussing a sale. I turned the screen toward the audience. You already signed the deal. The room exploded. Homeowners shouted over one another, voices overlapping in a chorus of outrage. You can't do that without a vote. She was going to sell our land behind our backs? Unbelievable. Marlene froze, her smile finally cracking. But here's where it gets really fun, I said, enjoying this way too much. Not only did you sign the deal before notifying the HOA, which is, fraud, but you also had a little extra incentive, didn't you? I pulled out the next document. This is a financial disclosure statement showing that Sunridge Development Group was prepared to transfer $100,000 into an account under your husband's name the moment the deal closed. The room went silent, dead silent. And then, "You were taking kickbacks?" someone screamed. Marlene flinched, for tucks. The first time her carefully crafted mask shattered. I don't know what... Save it, I cut in. Because I also contacted the county commissioner's office. Turns out, once this deal went through, Sunridge planned to rezone half the neighborhood for commercial use. You weren't increasing property values. Marlene, you were setting us up to be pushed out. At that, the crowd erupted. People demanded her resignation. Others threatened lawsuits. Someone even threw a coffee cup, missed her by a mile. But I appreciated the effort. And then, like music to my ears, the police walked in. Because while Marlene had been digging herself deeper into a PR nightmare, I had quietly forwarded all my evidence to the authorities. Officer Daniels approached her, handcuffs at the ready. Marlene Fitzsimmons, you're under arrest for fraud, conspiracy to commit real estate fraud, and destruction of private property. For a split second, I thought she might lunge at me. Her eyes were wild, her hands shaking. This is a mistake, she shrieked. I run this community. You can't do this to me. I built this neighborhood. I made it better. But no one was listening anymore. Daniels cuffed her. You have the right to remain silent. And just like that, Marlene Fitzsimmons, the queen of the HOA, the woman who had made my life a living hell, was dragged out of the community center in front of the entire neighborhood. Poetic. The aftermath was glorious. With Marlene gone, the HOA board collapsed within a week. People rallied to overturn half the ridiculous rules she had forced onto them. The fines, revoked, the audits, canceled. The neighborhood finally took back control. And as for me, I finally finished my damn pool. I threw a huge party, invited the entire neighborhood. Kids cannonballed into the water, adults sipped margaritas by the deck, and someone even brought a piñata with Marlene's face on it. But the best part? A few days later, I got a letter from the HOA, or rather, what was left of the HOA. Dear Mr. Carter, we are pleased to inform you that your pool renovation is officially approved. Sincerely, the new HOA board. I framed it, and just when I thought it was all over, just when I thought Marlene was finally out of my life forever, I got a call from Daniels. She cut a deal, he said. Flipped on the developers in exchange for a reduced sentence. I snorted. Let me guess, community service? Daniels chuckled. Not quite, but she does have to pay back a lot of those kickbacks she took. Good, I said. Let her rot. Then he hesitated. Well, there's one more thing. I raised a brow. What? Daniels sighed. Part of her plea deal? She gets to leave town. I exhaled. Fine, as long as she's gone. Yeah, about that. He cleared his throat. She's moving into a new HOA-controlled community, about 3 towns over. I burst out laughing. Of course she was. Like a cockroach, Marlene always found a way to survive, and some poor souls in another neighborhood were about to learn the hard way. But as for me, I leaned back in my chair, sipping a drink by my beautifully renovated, drama-free pool and let out a contented sigh. She wasn't my problem anymore. And that was victory.